Waiting for a hurricane, and while we have nothing to do except wait, we're going to have a little interview with Gramps.
What's today's date?
Today is
Today is the 27th, and of course
of September 1984.
September 1984, and you know that Margot passed away Monday, September 24th,
Right.
and that's why the family is down here to visit with me, Jeanette and Arthur
And Jay.
and Jay, and I'm very happy to have you here today. Today is the first day of Rosh Hashanah, and here in Florida, a hurricane is threatening, and we're having the most miserable weather right now, hoping for it to turn a little better. You asked me to tell you my life story, but how far can I go back? Well, what do you want to know?
Well, I wanted you to start at the beginning, I think.
What beginning? When I was born?
Well, even before that. Where did your father come from? What was his name?
Wait, you want me to go back to before I was born?
You don't remember since before you were born?
I don't. Before I was born, I remember exactly.
Exactly.
I don't remember what I had for breakfast this morning.
Okay, so put your mind back to before you were born,
Yeah.
and your father's name, and where did he come from?
Well, my father came from Romania, Bucharest, Romania.
Uh-huh.
And my mother came, I believe, from Austria, right near there.
Uh-huh.
So there's an Austrian-Romanian, right. And of course they were immigrants,
Uh-huh.
and they were peasants.
Did they were married in Europe, or they married
They
in?
were married in Europe,
Mm-hmm.
and my older sister, Jenny, who was passed away many years ago, they brought her to this country. They came here, I believe, in 1888.
Uh-huh.
And in those days, they naturally came over in steerage and through Ellis Island, but they were brought in by the highest society,
HIAS.
HIAS. See, they brought those immigrants in, and they settled them. They all settled, it seemed, in one section of the city, and there was no problem finding a couple of rooms. In those days, they were $5 a month for there were no, even some of the tenements weren't built. They were little two-story buildings.
Now this was on the Lower East Side.
On the Lower East Side, yeah. And they usually had one house in the front and one house in the back, and a little yard in between, and with the latrine there, the toilet, in the holes,
Like an outhouse.
like an outhouse in that yard there. See? And of course there was no electric. It was all kerosene lamps for. As a matter of fact, the water you had to use a pump, to pump it up with. See? And now these immigrants mostly all seem to come from the same. They call it shtetl, from the same
little village.
Little village with it, and they would have managed to put these men to work at whatever they were capable of doing. They found jobs for them. In those days, probably the job rate was $1 a day, and the hours didn't matter how long it worked, So. And then, of course, the women were given homework to do. In those days, they didn't have machines to make buttonholes on men's clothing, so the women, they brought those things to the women home, and the women made buttonholes by hand.
Well, what did your father do?
Well, my father had no trade, so he evidently was a little bit of a merchant. Grand Street in New York was the center of business. It was called Grand Street because at that time it was a grand street. You had some of the finest department stores and jewelry stores, and the women's shop, the dresses. I believe Milgram started down there.
Milgram?
Yeah. And some of the other fashion designers started down there. So, but one side of the street they allowed push carts. And so they gave my father a place there for a push cart, and that was his place there, see.
What did he sell?
Well, what did he sell? He had a department store on a push cart.
Uh-huh.
He sold everything from shoelaces to eyeglasses.
General merchandise.
General suspenders,
Uh-huh.
combs of all kinds. In those days, the ladies had fashion,
Right.
fashion combs, were all with rhinestones and things like that, all shapes and sizes. And then, of course, for men, suspenders and belts and hairbrushes and different things. When you bought a pair of eyeglasses, you had a newspaper there, and you'd pick out a pair, and you'd read the paper, which the ones that you could read the best, which is the ones that you bought there. And they sold for about 25 cents a pair. See? Now, and I'll tell you about the cop. Now, here's the situation there. You know, those days you had the Irish fat-bellied cops with those gray hats.
Right, yeah, the big hat.
That you see in the comics. But the cops, and then you talk about graft. The graft they were in use then.
Huh.
He had every pushcart owner had to pay 25 cents a week.
A week.
To the cop.
Hmm.
My father rebelled. He wouldn't pay the 25 cents, so they arrested him with the pushcart.
Oh my.
Took him into the police station there, and they held him there overnight. And by the time he got back to his pushcart back, it was practically empty.
Oh boy.
So then he paid the 25 cents. Now.
When did he open his store?
Who?
Your father.
Well, wait a minute.
Oh.
This is before 1900. I'm talking about.
Oh, okay.
1898, around that period there. Oh yes. Now, actually, you know, the Jews, these people used to get, the Nashville road Jews, they used to get together in what they call a wine shake, you know, in a wine cellar.
Oh, yeah.
On Sundays.
Uh-huh.
And for $1, they feed the whole family, including pitchers of wine and nuts and things, for $1 for the whole family. So they'd all meet in these wine cellars. Most of them were on Rivington Street and Houston Street and a tiny street. They were all selling. They'd rent a cellar, and you could eat for $1 for the whole family. We had, matter of fact, we had six children.
By that time, she had.
Yeah. Now I'll tell you something. I was actually to the birth of Bronzeville. At that time, Bronzeville was being built.
In Brooklyn?
In Brooklyn, yeah. And the stories came in on the news. There was no radio or anything like that, so they relied on the newspapers. The newspaper stories, they called it the New Golden of Medina in Bronzeville.
What is the Golden of Medina?
Golden Paradise. So, they were talking about the people who were going out there, business, you know, you went out there with anything, they were just building it, people were settling there, so they needed merchandise, pots and pans, linens, and fruits and everything else. It was open land actually then. The whole part of East New York, Bronzeville, was open fields.
Well, how did you get there?
The only way we could get there was a trolley car that ran out there.
Over the Brooklyn Bridge?
Over the Brooklyn Bridge. The Brooklyn Bridge had been built a little prior to that. And there was admission charge. You had to pay a fee to go over the bridge, see. It was only pennies, you know. So, the man next door, the next stand to my father's, he sold bric-a-brac. Some of these cranberry glass little bowls that you see crimped, and the little figurines, the little bisque dolls. There was an importer. They had some importers on Grand Street. One of the importers imported all this bric-a-brac and knickknacks, see. So he would buy it from that store there, put it on his pushcart, and sell it there. You'd be surprised what was sold for 10 cents. For a quarter, you could buy a vase this big in cranberry glass. So he said he wanted to go out with his push cart to Bronzeville on a Saturday, see. So I was very anxious, heard so much about Bronzeville, I said, I want to go. So he said, well, I'm leaving 6 o'clock in the morning. If you want to go, come 6 o'clock in the morning with me with a push cart, see. So I went alongside of him. He had his push cart all loaded, and he had it covered with they usually tack down some tarpaulin over it. And I walked with him from Grand Street down to the Brooklyn Bridge. That was the only bridge there at the time. And the walk was all cobblestone. I think he had to pay 2 cents to get over the bridge with his push cart there. And in those days, all the streets were cobblestones. And he pushed that cart. I think he got to Bronzeville. I know the sun was shining. It was a nice spring day, and other push carts had been lined up there. And horses and wagons. You could rent a horse and wagon for $2 for the day. They were all lined up with one with pots and pans and tinware, and others with other things, you know, household necessities. And he stayed there through the day there, and he sold every piece of merchandise that he had there. Then, of course, it got towards evening, and I was tired, and I lay down on the push cart. It was these long two-wheel push carts, and he pushed it all the way back to New York and came back in the evening, see. And it was the talk of the town. He made $10 a day.
Oh my.
See, he made $10 for that day. The newspapers were written up on the report, you know, they were looking for any articles. And of course, the Sundays when they all got together, and these wine, the big, that was actually the birth of Bronzeville. The streets hadn't been paved yet in Bronzeville, but they were putting up these buildings row after row after row there. That was in 1898.
All right, now, get back to your father. What was your father's original name when he came to this country?
The name was Ehrens. Ehrenprice.
And his name was what?
Samuel.
Samuel.
Yeah.
And what was your mother's name?
My mother's name was Yetta.
Yetta.
Y-A-T-T-A. I don't know what her maiden name was, but I think it was either Axelrod or I just can't remember now.
All right.
Or Axelrod or Alexander. I remember as a child, about 2 years old, she took us to Philadelphia, where this cousin or uncle Alexander lived. We went by streetcar there was horse-drawn streetcars at the time on Grand Street. The ferry took us across to Jersey, where we got on a Jersey train and brought us to Philadelphia. We were there for a weekend or something.
Now, how many children were there all together? Jenny was the oldest.
Jenny was the oldest. Then Hyman was next. He passed away, you know. And then
Was he a twin?
No.
Wasn't there a story?
There may be. I know my mother had many miscarriages.
Oh, I see. So there was Herman.
And then there was me.
Yeah.
And then there was Sadie.
That's Sadie Fella now.
Sadie fella.
Yeah.
And then there was my brother Jack. He's passed away.
Yeah.
And then Laura came last. Laura Davis.
Yeah.
She was the last one.
How old is Laura now? Laura's about 75?
Laura must be something like that.
Yeah, Laura Davis, and she's 75. So that's your family.
Yeah.
Now, when did your father get the store?
Well,
What did he do before he got the store?
Well, he was a peddler. You know, he had a...
well, I can tell you one thing. In those days, you know, everything was a penny.
Right.
Everything was a penny. So they bought a candy store, a marble fountain, you know, and in those days, the owners, the women, made many of the candies, or made stuffed dates, or you know, or other little delicacies that they made that were sold for pennies. And then we bought things there. That was the first store that I remember. That must have been around. My father kept on peddling.
Even though after you bought the store,
Yeah, he peddled.
he still had his push cart.
He didn't. No. He kept his push cart.
I'm saying he kept his push cart.
And he bought the store for Mother.
And your mother ran the
Who
store.
ran the store with the help of the kids.
Oh, I see.
Jenny was still around then. Well, however, the store only brought in pennies a day. The kids come in for a penny, you know.
Mhm.
So at the end of, we ran the store for some time, and we saw that it didn't pay.
Where did you live then?
And we lived usually in the back of the store.
Back of the store.
You know, it was in these tenement buildings
Mhm.
where you had the store in the front and a few rooms in the back there.
Mhm.
So Mother wanted to get rid of the store because it wasn't paying. In the meantime, while she was doing that, she was also taking in homework, you know.
She was doing sewing at home.
Sewing buttonholes or something like that. Or sewing buttons on pants. There were no zippers. Zippers, nobody had heard of a zipper, you know. You couldn't believe that there was never any. There were no zippers. Your pants, you had a button. You didn't zip up your pants. You buttoned your pants. So Mother wanted to get rid of the store, and in order to find a buyer to induce a buyer to show them what a profitable store it was, so my sister Jenny got all her friends together and gave the kids pennies and had them come in and buy a bag of candy for a penny. And then they'd go out in the front and go back into the hall. We had a back door, and the kids would give back the bag of candy. This was to impress the new buyer, the amount of business. We finally sold that store. Finally.
Was that the store that was called Cheap Sam's?
No. That Cheap Sam's comes later.
Oh.
We sold that store. My father still maintained his push cars there. Then he bought a store at 30 Willett Street. That was between Delancey and Broome, I think it is. Oh, incidentally, I can go back even further. At one time, we lived under the Manhattan Bridge as it was being built. We lived under it, you see. They built the bridge over us there. Somehow or other, we always managed to live on the 5th floor. It was the cheapest, you know, to walk up there. We always lived on the 5th floor. And I remember the bridge being built over our head there. Also, at that time, I must have been about 2 years old. And we didn't live too long in any of these places for some reason. Whether we couldn't pay the rent or whatever it was, or we found a cheaper place or whatever. We're always moving there. So, the one incident I do remember there was on a July 4th. I couldn't have been over 2 because I think I was in dresses yet.
Oh.
And the July the 4th, they were shooting off firecrackers. So, they lit it, and the thing didn't go off, so I went down and looked, and it blew up in my face.
Oh, boy.
See? So somebody brought me home. I said, what should I do? So he said, throw it, ink. So I had a bottle of ink, they put it up in my face. No, then the next thing that I remember, we lived near Grand Street. We also, right near Grand Street, in Grand and Clinton, there was a barn there, a horse barn with a horseshoe, with a
Blacksmith?
Blacksmith there, yeah. And I used to hang, you know, it was interesting, you know, the bang, 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 and I used to hang around there. And then I was also in a dress then, so it couldn't have been long after this, or about the same time then. And the streets were all cobblestones, you know, and the cobblestone streets, they were all laid with hot tar in between, see? And I was watching, they had a big container of tar, hot tar, and it was bubbling, see? And I didn't know what it was, and I put my hand in it there, see? And of course it burned, you know. So I ran right, it was right near the barn there, and they had an outside pump, you know, the iron pump. And I went over, and And evidently it did good, you know. It was cold water. I pumped that cold water on it, felt good, and that was it. Now, the next experience. Oh, the next experience. This is good. We moved we bought 30 Willett, bought that store, the candy store, 30 Willett Street. And we lived above it. We had rooms in the back, and we also showed all our you call them lunch, like, you know,
Your relatives.
relatives would come, so they'd sleep. We always had room for them to sleep, you know. I began my merchandising then. I started. The store didn't have any stationery for the school kids, you know. So I started buying.
Well, how old were you then?
I must have been 1906, about 10 years old.
You had stopped school?
I left school in the 4th grade. Somehow I didn't like school and I couldn't get along with it. I was always threatening, you know. I was the bad one. I finally got out in the 4th grade then. By that time, I don't remember whether I was 14 or not, but I left school in the 4th grade then.
So you were about 10?
Huh?
You were about 10?
12 maybe.
Not in the 4th. All right.
Yeah, I don't know how old I was, but I was out of school in the 4th grade. It didn't bother you so much in those days, did they? They figured you want to go out, that's all. So, the stores were called, the other the competitors, the big guy was Cheap Haber or something, see? And the other guy was Cheap John or something. So we called ours Cheap Sam, see? So the Cheap Haber went out of business, they sold them out at auction.
Uh-huh.
I couldn't have been over 10 years old at the time. And I went to the auction sale, and I bought, I was the bidder, see? And the auction, my father was backing me. But I did the bidding, and I bought, I may spend maybe $30 or $40 there, see? And I brought the stuff in, and so on and so forth. Now, besides that, I used to fix up the windows. I used to dress up the window dresses. You should see, I think you have one of the pictures there.
Right, I have. It's called Cheap Sam.
My other feature was this. Oh, then we had to have in order to bring up the business, we had to have newspapers.
Yeah.
So I built a stand for that. I think you can see it in the picture.
Mm-hmm.
For the newspapers.
Uh-huh.
And then of course we had an outside case with ice cream where we had a sandwich maker. You put in one of these crackers, only sweet crackers, in a metal form, and you put smear some ice cream on it, and put another. That was 2 cents.
Uh-huh.
Now, under the bridge, they built a fish market, fresh fish market.
Was that the Fulton Fish Market?
No. This is under the bridge, under the new and under Lancashire Street.
Under the Manhattan Bridge.
The whole block there was nothing but fish stalls. They were only open. They were only open for Thursday and Friday. These stalls. Believe it or not, they had live fish was brought in there. Evidently, they came in tank trains.
Train boats?
No. They brought from the lakes, from the Great Lakes.
Oh, yes.
Pike and carp and
Yeah.
pickerel were brought from the Great Lakes, live in tank trains. See, and most beautiful fish there. See, and they would sell whatever they needed. Newspapers to wrap the fish in. We didn't have, so I went into the business to supply. I was still going to school then. I did it between school hours. I rented a push cart by myself, I went down to the docks where the Italian people were collecting the newspapers, and I'd load up, I'd buy maybe 400 or 500 pounds of newspapers and bring it back, and I'd dump it into the cellar, and then I'd weigh them out into 5-pound packages. See? Tie them up with string, 5 pounds, and I'd put as many as I could on my shoulders, and I'd walk myself each one. I did it before I went to school, I did it between my lunch hour, and I did it after I came back. They were all looking for me because they all needed newspapers. So that was my first business venture, selling 5 pounds of paper.
Yeah. And that's why you still can't throw away a piece of paper or a piece of string.
Wait a minute. I can tell you why I can't. I have a phobia about paper.
Really?
Really. Why we handle this, I did everything. While we handled the store, somehow I made a connection with Wanamaker's.
Yeah.
Wanamaker had the most beautiful building. They had a candy department downstairs.
Where was it then?
8th Street.
It was 8th Street, the original one.
And
Broadway.
Broadway to Astor Place had 2 buildings there, huge buildings there. So they would bring out, for the holidays, you know, for instance, for Easter, they brought out Easter candies. For Christmas,
Right.
Now, after the holidays, they didn't know what to do with the candies. So I made a connection. I bought them from them. See, in those days the candies they didn't have boxing facilities. They came like in these
Crates?
No, these tin cans, you know, that you see like. They sell them decorated now.
Biscuit tins.
Huh?
Like a
no,
biscuit?
big ones like this size here, you know, tin drums like. See, and they would. I would go there and I'd rent a push cart and I would buy it there. See, so. And then of course I'd bring it to the store and I'd put them in a bag and sold them for a penny there. See. Now let's see, where did I go from there? So let me refresh my memory. Oh yeah, that was Wanamaker's. At 14, I got a job. You want to know why I'm stingy with papers?
Yeah.
At 14, I got a job in Wanamaker's in their silk department. See? As an errand boy. And the reason they needed an errand boy, the ladies did their shopping with horses and carriages driven by their coachmen and so on and so forth. And they would all park and they were given numbers, you know, so that we can identify how to bring it to carriage number 19 or 21 or whatever it was there. See? And then they had a signal there when they wanted the coach there, when the lady was ready to do her shopping. And there was a signal that they put up a flash number and they'd come in with the horse. Many of them, the fine carriages with a footman and the coachman, you know. There was no such thing as automobiles. So that was my job to bring the, incidentally, the biggest part of that Wanamaker building was taken over for fabrics. In other words, there was one floor for silk, all silk material. There was no such thing as rayons or anything like that. There was another whole, and this was a square block, a long square block. The second floor was chiffons and nets and different, you know, things of that nature. See, these embroidered, you know, fancy laces, and chiffons and things like that. The next floor was all cottons, all cotton goods, and the next floor was all woolens, by the yard, you know. And believe it or not, women used to buy materials. There was no such thing as going to a store and buying a garment. They all had dressmakers. They bought the materials, and as a matter of fact, in later years, when I became a businessman, when I was buying antiques, I bought from these homes that the women had died loads of fabrics that you
originally sold.
that were originally sold. As a matter of fact, in those days, believe it or not, the finest silks the finest silk sold for less than $1 a yard in retail.
Hmm.
You'd be surprised to see, you can buy crepe de chine for 50 cents a yard, things like that. So, so I got this job in Wanamaker's, and waiting between calls. So I had a piece. I was a piece of white paper, you know, or a sheet of paper. I was making some doodling or something. I was making a star or something. And the man who was in charge of the help there saw me doing that, and he said, "You're wasting John Wanamaker's property." He's come downstairs with me. He fired me on the spot because I wasted a piece of John Wanamaker's paper there. So to this day I remember it.
But Dad, you skipped one of your other earlier jobs. I remember you telling me your story.
Oh yes.
Wait. I think you're going to.
All it.
Oh.
You're on.
Is it on?
Yeah.
Getting back to my earlier days, and I'm jumping ahead of myself. Getting back to my earlier and trying to, you know, things pop up in my mind there. When I was about 4 or 5, about 4, my father had the pushcart on Grand Street.
Yeah.
My mother was, we lived in a 4 or 5 story building. She was the janitress for the building. Now, the store, the Grand Street was all stores. The stores had basements with steps going down to the basement. Some of these were used for businesses, you know. But in front of every store was an iron grating. All along Grand Street was an iron grating, see? Just picture this. On the sidewalk, in front of every store was an iron grating, and at the curb was a pushcart, where pushcarts were lined up. So, I was as big as nothing, and I used to crawl down these steps there, and crawl in between the steps and under the gratings, and I always found, you know, I always came home with money that I gave my mother. And sometimes it was, you know, just a few pennies, sometimes it was a quarter and whatever it was. And every day I brought her home money. It was an everyday thing with me because I was finding money, see? And my mother, I said, I found it. So one Saturday morning, she didn't believe, she thought I was stealing it or something, I don't know. She didn't believe that I could find money every day. So she's come with me, she took me, show me where you find the money. I said, oh, okay, she came with me. And she saw I crawled down under the steps there. The whole length of Grand Street, I could go under any one of those you know, I was so small I could squeeze in between the steps there, see. And all I had to do was get down there and pick up money, and then she realized that I was actually finding the money. I gave her every penny. I gave her every penny. I never kept a penny from her. So that was my early experience on, and I was never without a job. You asked me what I did. I remember working, I think before, I worked in a candy factory where they were making like caramel corn, and they had no machinery. They had tables that ran the length of the loft, and they had a wax paper laying down there, and they would work it out by hand, you know, making this caramel corn there. The caramel with coconut or whatever it was, the whole length of the table. And in order to make that, they had big copper kettles. And there was a place there where you could, when you came, where you hung up your coat, and they had kettles right underneath that, see? And I couldn't reach to hang up my coat there, and one of the kettles looked like it was full of sawdust. I thought I'd step on the sawdust, you know, the kettle of sawdust. But the sawdust was on top of the molasses there, and I stepped right into it. That was my last day I worked there. But then I had another job it's unbelievable that this was an Italian importer that imported green olives. and they came in casks that weighed over 1,000 pounds.
1,000 pounds?
That's right. The huge casks. They came in water. You know, the green olives.
Uh-huh.
They came in salt and water.
Uh-huh.
And how the hell they got it down in the basement there, I don't know. But I remember the sink was upstairs. To empty it was one flight up. The keg of the big vat, it's as big as, that keg was as big as a Volkswagen.
Huh.
Matter of fact, China used to come in, and they call them hogsheads.
Hogsheads, right.
Even China used to be brought in from England and all places. I can tell you that story later, that I bought a lot of it, some of it which you have, you know.
Right.
Remember I had it down in the basement
Right.
there?
Right.
So, my job, in those days there weren't no containers, you didn't have much in the way of containers. You either had to buy something that made out of tin. There was no cartons or anything like that.
So people came to the store?
Everything came in wooden kegs, small wooden kegs, you see. Even butter came in butter tubs, you know, wooden, it weighed 25 pounds, something like that. Even jellies came in wooden tubs. The thing that, when you bought butter, loose butter in the store, they put it in a wooden dish. It was a sliver of wood, but it was wood. As a matter of fact, if you bought strawberries, they came in a wooden basket, you know, trimmed with. So, my job was to empty that hogshead. So we had a coal scuttle. Now, that hogshead stood about 5 foot tall. And I wasn't even 5 foot. But the thing that got me was this, you know, we had a rubber hose going from the upstairs floor to the hogshead, and when you turn the water on to go into the hogshead, and you disconnect it, the water runs up by itself, gravity. Did you know that?
No. I still don't understand it.
You understand? You take. I couldn't understand how it works, but it works. You've got to disconnect it right away, see, and the water runs right back up. See? So. Naturally, I would take this coal scuttle, real coal scuttle, and dump it in wooden kegs, you know, that weighed about 25 pounds. And then, of course, when it came to the bottom, I couldn't reach it, and I fell into that. I got tired of eating olives. I tried to empty it by eating it. It's like I just read recently, the astronauts.
Yeah.
Everything floats in the air.
Right.
And evidently a glob of water escaped and was floating around in the vehicle, you know.
Yeah.
And they wanted to get rid of it because they were afraid it was going to get into some of the machinery. So the only way they could do it, the two of them got together and they sucked it in. I just read that the other day. They wanted to get it, but the water was suspended in the air. Well, so now you've heard the, you know, I was never without work. By the way, most of these jobs pay $2 or $3 a week at the most, and the hours were unlimited. And at least you had to work 6 days. I forgot to tell you about the place where covered buttons were a necessity practically. Every garment was made. So I worked for a guy that made covered buttons, you know. In other words, the manufacturer of whatever he was making would send the materials over, and we'd chop out the button and you'd have I worked for a cloth and suitor. Unbelievable. Well, however, let's see how my mind is.
You're making covered buttons. But so you worked for Wanamaker's, you worked for all these manufacturers, and you learned silks, and you ended up buying materials and so forth. And then, when you were 18, you went to your first auction?
No, I'll come to that. My first auction, I tell you when I was 10.
All right, right.
And I tell you about my real first auction. I'll tell you about it. I just distracted my mind from something important I was going to tell you. About the job, oh yeah, about the job.
The
Yeah.
covered buttons.
No, forget about that. This other job, this will just come to me.
We'll come back to it.
Oh, yeah. On Lower Broadway, there was a big toy importer. His name was Rosenstein. Talk about cruel bosses in those days. When I say cruel, I mean cruel, and a vicious temper. Everybody, all his workers were, he didn't call it a lowlife thing. And he'd get, for no reason at all, he'd get you by the throat, and push you or something like that. And he did the meanest things, including to me also. I'll tell you one of the meanest things that was done to me. This is really important. This man imported his finest dolls from Germany, dress dolls, in all sizes, from things that probably would bring thousands of dollars a day. They came in a paper box, a long box. And every time he did something vicious, these boxes were laying out on shelves. The bisque head was always in the back, his feet were in the front there. So what I would do, I'd pick up the box and bang the head and break the head. The most beautiful dolls, beautifully dressed. In those days, they said the most beautiful dolls sold for maybe $20, which was like 200 today, He was so goddamn vicious. I worked all day. I think at that time I was getting maybe $4 a week. Jay, you better come and listen to this.
I just want to close some of
You
this.
better listen to this here.
Okay, go ahead.
When we got through for the day, working for the day, with a horse and wagon, we had to go out and make deliveries along 3rd Avenue to the stores, that bought. He had all sorts of toys there. See? So I would have to go on the wagon and sit on the tail, so the kids wouldn't rob. So the kids used to throw rocks at me and stuff. I'm getting ahead of myself in the story. So it's about 5 o'clock, and the truck was being loaded. And of course, there were always push carts around with fruit, where you could buy an apple for a penny or a banana for a penny. And I'll never forget this. The son of the owner of this place was, talk about his father being vicious. He was just as vicious, or worse. I was eating an apple as the truck was being loaded. He came over, grabbed the apple out of my hand, and threw it outside. He said, "Got some knife." He said, "Eating at my father's time." I'm getting $4 a week, and I worked till 10 o'clock at night before we made all the deliveries. That son of a bitch pulled the apple out of my hand. I was eating an apple on the boss's time. There were lots of bosses like that. I forget another. I worked in a wholesale stationery store, and in those days, as I said, everything came in wooden. There was no cotton. So they had the ink. The little bottles of ink came in little wooden cases, about 12 bottles of a case, and we had them stacked up in the basement there. And I moved something, the damn things fell over, and they all fell over on me. I was laying trapped there. The boss tried to crash, and he came running down. He said, "Mom," he started cursing me because I damaged his stock there. The fact that I was laying under there meant nothing. So that's some of my earlier experiences. If I got
We haven't got that much tape. We got to jump ahead now. The kids will want to know how you ended up with your first store. How did you get to that?
Oh, okay. Now I'll come to my real first auction buy. There was an auction of a jobber who handled toys like toy whistles, penny things, in those days, there were many items for a penny. You could buy a nice tin whistle for a penny, or a horn for a penny, or a paper toy, whatever it was, a racket thing there, all for pennies. And I don't know, I wound up spending $700 there.
Oh, boy.
I don't know where the hell I got the money from. I had no place. I had no place of business.
And how old are you then?
I must have been 16 or 17 or something like that. I had no place of business. And I paid for it, and all of a sudden I went down with a flu. It had to be removed. We had no place to move it to, so we got, I also, one thing leads to another, you know, it reminded me of Davis's jewelry store.
Oh, well, that's another
Yeah.
story.
So this Goldberg had a loft on Chase Street, near Canal Street. So he let us move all his junk up there. And I tried selling or whatever it is. I think it was a total loss practice. Hyman, my brother Hyman, moved the stuff for me. And this Goldberg let me put the stuff up there. It's a radio. There's nothing in it though. I took out the batteries rather. And so that from there on in. Oh, yo, this is after World War I. Wait a minute. This is interesting. I started going to auction sales, especially the bankruptcy sales. And I started buying anything and everything. I went to the post office where they sold, the American Express, where they sold things that were lost or abandoned or something. So remember, I bought a case or a carton of putties, you know, what putty, leather putties, yeah. But they were all samples. I wanted, you know, for one leg. And then I bought a lot of shoes. They were also samples for one.
When did you get your first store?
Wait a minute, I'm coming to those World War I. I rented a piece of a store on my little Espinassy right behind Canal Street for $50 a month. And I built the shelves all around it. The store was about 12 by 15 or something like that.
This was right after the war?
Right after the war. And in bankruptcy is a sale of a company that made replicas of battleships out of wood. See? It was made out of solid heavy wood, not light wood. They made them in all sizes. They made, you know, they were painted gray and the little, you know, white on the red and smokestacks for pieces of wood there, you know, and they ran from this size to this size there. So I come up, this is a nickel a piece, so I buy them. There's maybe 400 of them there. Heavy as hell. I buy the next size maybe 8 cents a piece, and maybe 500 of them. And I buy them all the way to, also wind up spending about $700. This is a new store that I just opened. And I think I took in Hyman was a partner. He didn't know that I bought, see. And I started bringing these things in loads, in cases. And I started lining up the shelves and had from the floor to the ceiling battleships. Nobody wanted battleships, you know, right after the war there. And I couldn't put them all in the store. So I got a neighbor there, let me put it in the case in case they were down in the basement there. See? Don't ask me how we got rid of them. I don't know. I don't know how the hell we got rid of them. I have no idea how we got rid of them. Paid nothing for them, but it amounted to $700. And the whole store, customers were coming to buy. What do you got? Battleships or what? Well, I abandoned the stuff that I had to sell there, and somehow or other I managed. Of course, Hyman fought. He fought with me about it. How? Well, I did it all. What the hell can you do? So I started buying dry goods. And we were pretty successful with the dry goods.
What do you mean by dry goods?
You know, dry goods, underwear, pants, shirts, socks, sweaters, anything that I come across, you know, with things like that, you know. And not only did we have individual customers, but from all out of town, you know, they used to come in, little shopkeepers, you know, see, and buy something, whatever it was, you know, that for them to resell again.
Uh-huh.
And of course, then I outgrew that store, and I rented a big store on Church Street. And I remember I myself put up a lot, it was a big store, I put up tremendous amount of shelving and racks for clothing and things like that. And I bought everything. I didn't care what it came. One of the things that I remember now that I bought, that was the biggest mistake. We had our source of material, buying stuff was from a few auction houses that represent the insurance companies, shipping companies, and things like that. And you'd be surprised the amount of stuff that goes astray. See, that winds up, they finally either the insurance company is paid for it or they lost, you know, and it winds up in their places. And I remember buying a set of antique Harbison furniture,
Chairs.
sofas and chairs, a whole set, maybe 5 or 6 pieces. Remembering the style now, I think it was Louis the 14th or 15th.
French period furniture.
French period furniture.
Needlework.
Yeah, but the finest of Harbison, you know, with all these figurines, you know. And Hyman was my partner, and he was raising hell with me with everything that I bought. And I knew that from my fabric, that this needlework was expensive. So I didn't want to bring him into the place because I knew he would holler at me. So I cut out the needle with a razor blade. I cut out and I gave the guy a few dollars to bind up that the furniture. From knowledge now that I know about that set would have brought $15,000-$20,000 today. See, that was only one of my mistakes.
Did you sell the needlework?
No, I tell you what. I made a package of it and put it down the cellar so that he wouldn't see it, and I never saw the package since.
Oh my!
I know what happened. A young fellow came to me and applied for a job. He was an orphan or something, and he needed a job, and I gave him a job. And he told me he was going to school. He needed a briefcase, so I had briefcases. I gave him a briefcase. I also carried umbrellas, you know, umbrellas. So, however, I finally noticed that things were disappearing. I didn't take notice. I know every night he went home with the briefcase, and every night he went home with an umbrella. I know he came home with the briefcase, but I didn't remember whether he came home with an umbrella or not. See. Well, finally, one day, you know, I kept merchandise downstairs. I said, well, remind me to tell you about my the hats. So I come home, I get suspicious of the guy, and I send him out on an errand about 4:30 or something like that. And I know where he kept his briefcase, and all of it was full of silk stockings. He had silk stockings. This was on a Friday night. I let him go. I let him take it, and I had him clean up the next day. I had him clean up a thorough clean up of the basement. And I fired him. See. Now, this was a big store. I did the buying myself. I went to somehow I got to a man who manufactured all kinds of headwear, men's headwear, railroad caps, miners' caps, fur caps, berets, cook's hats, anything, you know, regular caps, anything like that. Man's been in business about 50 years, and by that time, I had built up some credit in the bank. In those days, the credit was easy in the bank. if you had $500 in that bank in your checking account, you could have almost immediately get a $5,000 line of credit immediately.
Uh-huh.
So I went to this guy's place there, and he's got lofts full of hats and caps there, of all kinds. And I make a deal with him for $2,500. It was the biggest deal I'd made up to then. And I bought all of the truckloads and truckloads of stuff there. And of course he raised hell with me, Hyman. And
How did you sell it?
well, we had dealers came and bought it.
Uh-huh, so you wholesaled it.
Wholesalers. So we whatever. Don't ask me how we got rid of it then.
Around what year was that?
Huh?
Around what year was this?
This in the 20s, in the 1920s. Of course, I made a number of mistakes. Remember me the dolls and the stationery, loose leaf stationery. I also went to a bankruptcy sale, and this was they specialized in loose leaf books and papers, from ledgers, you know, from small ones to huge ledger sheets. And of course they were expensive in those days, you know, with the keys, you know.
Right.
And the auctioneer it was in bankruptcy. He couldn't get a bid on the lot, no, there was nobody there to buy it. So I opened my mouth and I said, 500, and I got it. I didn't know what the hell to do with it. Remind me to tell you about the hatpins. So I brought them in. I brought them into this place and went down the basement. Loads. The hard covers and the... I didn't know what the hell to do with it down there. So I went to another sale.
Well, did you get rid of it?
I'll tell you how I got rid of that. I put it out of the sun, I never got rid of it. I'll tell you how it went though. I bought, as I said, I bought anything from shoelaces to corsets to men's collars to haberdasheries, whatever. And I remember buying a big lot of imported gloves, ladies and men's, in the original boxes. A tremendous amount of it there. And I had the store loaded. The stuff that this loose leaf stuff was down in the basement, and the whole place was whatever it was then. So one day while Hyman was out to lunch, this guy walks in. What's the name from? I get you the fabrics from.
Mike.
It's Michaels. Joe Michaels. He comes in, he says, do you want to sell the stock? I said, sure. He says, what do you want for it? I don't know. He said, what do you give me? He said, I'll give you $5,000 for it. I figured I came in with nothing. So I just sold. So he gave me a couple of $100 bills, gold bills, you know, in that time, gold $100 bills. And he said, okay, fine. He said, I said, it's yours, lock the door. And he had a lock with him, he put his lock on. He said, let's go out to lunch. It was about lunchtime, Hyman was out. See. I think I left a little note that I'll be back soon, whatever it was. So when I came back, he said, well, what happened? I said, I sold the stock. What do you mean you sold it? I said, I sold the stock. I got $5,000, $5,000 cash, I got $5,000. But he said, why didn't you hold out for more? I said, no, I was satisfied. $5,000 was $5,000. He moved the stock. I don't know how he did with it, but that was the end of that story.
And that's the same Joe Michaels who still has the store on Lispinard Street.
On Lispinard Street. In my store.
That was
At my
Well, you were saying
that was the second store.
That was the second store.
That was the second store. I rented that there.
Because I remember a store on Lispinard Street.
That store, that was a large store. That was filled with everything.
I remember the store on Lispinard Street.
That was filled. even antiques.
Well,
That's when
how
I
did
started buying my
When did you
merchandise.
start to buy antiques?
Then I bought cases and hogsheads of china. The largest part of it was Gouda ware.
Uh-huh.
And
This is
stone-
this is 1929?
No, that was in the 20s, the early 20s.
Because I remember the store on just Bernard Street.
All right. That's, no, so I'll tell you now this is interesting. This is a big store. One of the things that I remember buying was salvage. Oh, there's some of the things I tell you. How I got into China. They sunk the Germans sunk one of our ships on the docks in Hoboken.
Uh-huh.
It was loaded with Rosenthal china.
Oh.
See? And I bought a load of that Rosenthal china,
Uh-huh.
salvage.
Uh-huh.
And of course I had sold it for pennies, in those days there. Then there was a big firm, an imported firm, that imported hat pins. Hat pins were a big thing in those days. They were jewel tops, they were with figurines, with like horses or dogs, embossed. Beautiful things that would bring fortunes today. And jet trimmings, jet ornaments. Jet ornaments were a big thing in those days. Black, beautiful jets, and all sorts of buckles, the finest buckles, and other things of that sort. It was also in bankruptcy, and I go to this sale. They were sold by the case. They were all laid out in cases. The hat pins, stacked up. How much for the $2 for the case? What the hell can I go wrong? I finally wind up. All these bodies almost ran to $700 around that figure there. I needed truckloads.
Hey!
Alexandra, go by the Christmas tree. Go under the Christmas tree. Go by the Christmas tree. Whoopsie.
What you doing?
Say Merry Christmas, Alexandra. Merry Christmas. Now pick her up.